Leroy "Nicky" Barnes was a notorious figure whose fame and criminal activities brought him to the attention of the highest levels of state power, much like mobsters Al Capone and John Gotti. His story even sparked the anger of then-President Jimmy Carter, particularly after Barnes appeared on the cover of a major magazine, flaunting his status as one of the country's top drug lords, with a network of around 3,000 dealers, generating millions of dollars. Barnes was born on October 15, 1933, in Harlem, New York. His childhood was tough, growing up in a dysfunctional family. His mother was a housewife who endured beatings and humiliation from Barnes's father, who was an unreliable provider, earning money through gambling and occasional part-time jobs. Over time, Barnes's father became an alcoholic, and the domestic violence worsened, sometimes involving young Leroy as well. Seeking refuge from his troubled home life, Barnes spent most of his time on the streets. By the age of 9, he had already broken the law. While working as a shoeshine boy, Barnes stole money from an intoxicated customer, which led to his first arrest. This early brush with the law marked the beginning of his criminal career. Barnes also had his first encounter with drugs at home. While cleaning, he discovered a bag of powder, which he assumed his father had stashed away for profit. Barnes took some of the powder and sold it on the street, without his father ever noticing the theft. This event marked Barnes's entry into the world of drug dealing. Life in Harlem was far from idyllic. It was rife with youth gangs, and Barnes quickly became involved in gang activities. His gang frequently clashed with others, and members often used homemade firearms. Barnes himself acquired a gun, although he never had to use it in these gang wars. Barnes's story is one of a troubled youth who rose to become a powerful and infamous figure in the world of crime. If you're interested in learning how he built one of the largest and most successful drug networks in American history, meet Leroy "Nicky" Barnes, a man who lived on the other side of the law. One day, Leroy Barnes returned home to find his parents in a heated argument. When his father took a swing at his mother, Leroy intervened, shouting at him to stop. His father then threatened him, prompting Leroy to shoot. However, the shot was weak, only slightly frightening everyone present. Barnes was lucky to have all his fingers intact, and his father only ended up with a scratch on his jacket. After this incident, Leroy decided to leave home and seek real revenge with the help of his gang. They tracked his father to his night shift job, and while they initially planned to kill him, they settled for threats. Shortly after, Barnes's father left the family, but this didn't change Leroy's trajectory toward a life of crime. Already exposed to cocaine, Leroy and a friend decided to rob a drug dealer. His friend scouted the dealer's house, noting minimal security. The next day, they stormed the apartment, demanding money. However, they left the door open, and a crowd of neighbors gathered. Leroy's friend escaped, but Leroy had to jump out a window, narrowly escaping the police below. Despite his criminal activities, Leroy stood out in his neighborhood for his stylish clothes, unlike his friends who spent their money on drugs. A local drug dealer named Fat Herbie noticed Leroy's appearance and personal qualities, employing him first as a courier, then for more significant tasks. One such task involved picking up a bag of heroin from a nearby neighborhood, which Leroy successfully completed. As a courier, Leroy started earning substantial money, but his addiction to heroin, often mixed with cocaine, consumed his earnings. To sustain his habit, he resorted to breaking into cars, which eventually led to his arrest and a 3.5-year prison sentence. He served 1.5 years before being released on parole, having kicked his addiction in prison. Determined not to use drugs again, Leroy decided to only sell them. Back on the streets, Leroy distanced himself from Fat Herbie and formed his own gang. They financed their operations by robbing houses, stealing valuables, and even forcing victims to strip if they wore expensive clothes. With the money they gathered, they bought a good car and secured a reliable supplier of quality heroin. Leroy preferred to sell at night, dividing the heroin into portions and hiding them in various locations near his dealer meetings. To minimize risk, he kept the heroin at home as briefly as possible. Barnes's business quickly grew, driven by his understanding of what addicts wanted. He marked his bags of heroin with black duct tape, a sign of quality that attracted buyers from all over Harlem. Eventually, Leroy no longer sold the drugs personally, delegating this to his dealers. He even had a bodyguard to ensure his safety. Despite his bodyguard's presence, Leroy "Nicky" Barnes fell victim to an unexpected betrayal by his wife, Nita. One day, Nita met a childhood friend and during their conversation, mentioned Leroy's drug dealing activities. Unbeknownst to Nita, her friend was a police informant. A few days later, the police raided Barnes's apartment. Although they didn't find drugs, the large amount of cash and drug packaging materials were enough to charge him. Barnes was sentenced to 5 years at Green Haven Correctional Facility. While serving his sentence, Barnes met Matthew Madonna, a mafioso from the Lucchese family, who was serving a 20-year sentence. Madonna was deeply involved in the heroin trade through the French Connection, a vast network that smuggled heroin into the United States. The two men bonded over their shared experiences and talked extensively about the heroin business. Madonna admired the Italian mob's family spirit, contrasting it with his own lack of visitors in prison. Seeing potential in Barnes, Madonna proposed a partnership. Upon Barnes's release, Madonna's brother, Frank, provided him with 1/2 kilogram of heroin and $2,000. With this, Barnes bought a car, rented a secluded place, and established a stash house. Frank continued to mentor Barnes, advising him to avoid direct involvement with the drugs and to delegate tasks to his subordinates. Barnes encountered a turf conflict with another dealer, Steve Austin. Ready to resort to violence, Barnes was dissuaded by Frank, who emphasized the importance of product quality over territorial dominance. Frank's advice proved valuable, and Barnes focused on maintaining high-quality heroin, marked with black duct tape, which became highly sought after in Harlem. Barnes also implemented strict operational security, forbidding his team from discussing business over the phone, suspecting police surveillance. His suspicion was confirmed when one of his associates, Reggie, had his phone tapped by the police. On January 29, 1965, Barnes was arrested at Reggie's apartment. The police seized $500,000 worth of heroin during the raid, marking the culmination of a lengthy investigation by the Bronx District Attorney's Office and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Though Barnes tried to challenge the legality of the wiretap and arrest, his efforts were unsuccessful. Leroy "Nicky" Barnes was found guilty of drug possession and sentenced to 15 years in Green Haven Prison, where he had served time previously. In prison, Barnes converted to Islam and studied African history, embracing the Nation of Islam's teachings. He vowed to never use substances again and gave up pork. During this time, he distanced himself from Matthew Madonna, an Italian mafioso he had previously befriended. Despite tensions between Italians and African Americans in Green Haven, Barnes formed a notable friendship with Joe Gallo, an Italian mobster who often defended black prisoners. Rumors suggested that Gallo considered becoming a heroin supplier for Barnes, but Barnes's own efforts and knowledge played a significant role in his early release. Barnes found a legal precedent in the case of Charles Katz versus the United States, which argued that Katz's phone booth conversations were protected by the Fourth Amendment. Using this precedent, Barnes's attorney challenged his wiretap and arrest, leading to Barnes's release after serving less than 4 years of his 15-year sentence. Upon his release, Barnes aimed to transform Harlem's drug trade, modeling his organization after Italian crime families. He established the Council, a structured and disciplined group. The council consisted of 7 members, many of whom were former addicts like Barnes. They bought high-quality heroin from the Italians, packaged it into 141,000 portions, and distributed it efficiently across New York and beyond. Each council member controlled specific territories, with hundreds of street vendors under their supervision. Barnes's heroin, marked by its purity, became highly sought after. Even when diluted, it remained popular. The council's operations expanded, reaching Baltimore, Philadelphia, Oakland, and even Canada. Barnes himself lived lavishly, frequented the best nightclubs, and maintained an extravagant wardrobe, reflecting his status and success in the drug trade.
Barnes was the biggest drug dealer in New York.
You ever kill anybody?
No.
Had other people do it for you?
I guess I would best describe it, yeah. Yeah.
It was while Barnes was in prison that he suspected that the 2 main women in his life were sleeping with his former business partners. How could he get even? Testify against his old pals, put them in prison, become a hero to the feds. 1 year after his indictment, Leroy "Nicky" Barnes was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. It was while Barnes was in prison that he suspected that the 2 main women in his life and were sleeping with his former business partners, thus violating the code of honor that he says existed on the street.
a very attractive woman. And in New York, there are several million eligible men. Now, I told her that we have a hands-off policy to about 20 of them.
I can't think it very well. They were a couple of friends of mine that were supposed to be doing things for me, you know? Yeah. And well, they're doing things against me, really. And I have no way to reach out to get to them, and I want to get back at them, really. That's my primary reason.
Tell me what it is you have in mind.
They were a couple of friends of mine that were supposed to be doing things for me, you know?
Yeah.
And well, they're doing things against me, really. And I have no way to reach out to get to them, and I want to get back at them, really. That's my primary reason.
Were you surprised that he was going to do it?
I was surprised that a person like Nicky Barnes would do it.
When it comes to testifying, I testified against the guys who were Guy Fisher, Frank James, Wally, Coco, Kenny, and you know, a couple other guys, because I said, as far as Guy Fisher was concerned, I said, Guy Fisher, I gave him a woman of mine that I expected him to look out for her, and I expected him to take care of her. I didn't expect him to start fucking her.
Drug counsel is a myth. It's the first time I heard of counsel was when I was in court in 1983.
Guy Fisher, who had a brief affair with Barnes' former girlfriend, Shemeka, was a member of that 7-man drug council, according to Barnes. Fisher is now serving life without parole after Barnes testified against him.
You mean to tell me that you can give someone a life plus sentence because you said he had sex with my girlfriend?
And he's putting people behind bars, helping to make cases for the feds.
There is no justice in terms of that. Ah, man. I mean, 8 years ago, Nick was the scum of the earth in terms of court, being in the courtroom, in Judge Worker's court. And then 3 years ago, he became Robin Hood because he was telling. It's really sad, you know. I'm laughing, but it's sad.
I don't know why he had the bonus, and then I don't know why the other council members let him live after they knew he did it.
Important was the information.
I think it was terribly important.
In that?
I think it was terribly important because it resulted in the conviction of Barnes as the hard core of Barnes' entire operation.
9 former associates of Harlem drug king Leroy Nicky Barnes charged today with narcotics conspiracy and 6 murders. As Jim Van Sickle learned, the man behind the charges is none other than Barnes himself.
I expected him because what I was asking to do was just a small thing. Because he had women of his own. He had women who were as attractive as mine. I don't know, man.
Barnes testified about his secret 7-member drug council composed of the most successful black heroin dealers in New York, some of whom attended this birthday party for Barnes in the middle 70s. According to Barnes, they shared an oath of brotherhood and loyalty to one another.
I think he should be given credit for his having cooperated with the government to encourage others to come forward and cooperate and bust up these operations. Essentially what should happen with him, in my view, is at some point he should be permitted to be released from prison at some point.
Do you think that you should get a pardon after all the pain and misery that you caused?
I think that I deserve some type of relief because it's customary. I don't see why policy of the Justice Department should change because of Nicky Barnes.
You got any remorse about what you did, Nick? You think it was...
No,
not at all,
man. No.
I think that the realistic situation here has to be that when people turn in, organizations like this account for 50 people being convicted. Everyone he's testified against has been convicted and their cases have been upheld on appeal. There has to be some reward for that. That's the only way we can combat this kind of activity.
If they let him out, Barnes says, he would like to teach the young about the dangers of drug addiction. Were he to get out, he would have to remain in the witness protection program, guarded for the rest of his life by the U.S. Marshals.
We talked to old pals of his who are now in Lewisburg prison, they said, listen, he's a snitch. He'll be on the street in no time. They really believe that the only reason that he did it was not because he got religion, but because he wants to get on the street and that you're going to help him do just that.
I think my information resulted in maybe 75 or 80 felony convictions. They have a place in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary that they call it the Nicky Barnes Ring, because all of the people up there were people that I gave up. You know, I just said, no, I'll pull them motherfuckers in here with me. I'll pull them in here with me and let them see what it's like. No, I don't regret that. I would rather be out here than to be in there with...
Leroy Nicky Barnes had a love for expensive cars and owned a Bentley, a Citroën SM, a Maserati, a Mercedes-Benz 300 SEL, several Cadillacs, and a yellow Volvo. To avoid attracting the attention of tax authorities, he created a network of fictitious companies that supposedly leased him these cars. Barnes also engaged in charity, supporting orphans, single mothers, and distributing turkeys on Thanksgiving and gifts on Christmas. Despite these good deeds, the harsh reality was that Harlem had turned into a ghetto, with heroin addiction rates doubling from 1970 to 1974. President Richard Nixon declared drug addiction as public enemy number 1 in 1971, but New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller's solution was to impose extremely harsh anti-drug laws, including life imprisonment for drug dealers. This approach was ineffective, and Barnes found it laughable, suggesting that corrupt police officers should be targeted instead. In 1972, a scandal erupted when drugs seized during the French Connection investigation were found to be replaced with flour and starch. This incident only fueled public distrust. The authorities, needing to prove the effectiveness of their tough laws, targeted high-ranking drug traffickers like Barnes. The media played a significant role in building Barnes's notoriety. A New Yorker article labeled him one of the untouchables in the drug trade. Barnes, photogenic and flamboyant, became a media sensation, while other major drug dealers like Jose Rosa received less attention. In August 1973, as the Rockefeller Act was about to take effect, the police attempted to catch Barnes. Returning from a trip, Barnes found his wife unable to meet him due to a power outage. When he returned home, police searched his apartment but found only $50,000 in cash, a few guns, and a marijuana joint. They had expected a significant drug bust, but found nothing substantial.
I'm a bookmaker, and right now on camera I want to lay you 9 to 5 that Nicky Barnes, Leroy Barnes, gets out of jail.
New York gangster Herbie Sperling spoke with Barnes when they were in prison together in New York, and they worked out a drug deal at Barnes' suggestion that eventually resulted in the conviction of Sperling's son.
I'm doing the same sentence that Nicky Barnes was doing. Life without parole. I've got it the longest in the country. It's worse than a death sentence. A death sentence, you're dead and life goes on. Here you linger and you linger, and sometimes people get depressed. Now, some people get so depressed that they decide to make up a story.
You think he's going to get out?
There's no doubt in my mind. The government has to let him out. This is part of their propaganda ploy. What they're saying is anybody that wants to get out, just make up stories about a lot of people. We got plenty of room. We got a lot of prisons. We'll replace them with you and we'll let you out. No matter what you did, no matter what you do. I was overwhelmed by guilt. I was overwhelmed by guilt. I had every reason to testify against them and no reason at all to feel guilty. And I started crying on the stand.
From guilt.
Yeah.
And emotion.
And emotion. I couldn't talk.
Nicky Barnes turned government informant and began to tell all he knew. And because his testimony helped put 50 other people in prison, there are those in government who say he should be pardoned. Among the people he informed on were his former drug colleagues and his women. How did he feel testifying against them?
Now, he began to talk against his former drug associates like Fisher out of a motive of revenge. It soon became apparent that freedom was mostly on his mind. And since Barnes knew he could only be released through a presidential pardon, he understood that the government wanted more from him. So he testified before the President's Commission on Organized Crime, wearing a hood, telling the commission about drug operations in New York. And Barnes began to snitch on his fellow inmates as well.
Barnes mocked the police's efforts, considering the search a desperate attempt to justify their months-long investigation. Despite constant surveillance and wiretaps, the police failed to find incriminating evidence. Barnes knew he had to be careful with his wealth to avoid attracting IRS attention. He didn't want to end up like Al Capone, who was imprisoned for tax evasion. With the help of his lawyer, Barnes found ways to navigate the tax system and continue his operations without drawing undue attention. The Federal Housing Administration, FHA, founded by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, provides affordable mortgages for low and middle-income people. Nicky Barnes saw an opportunity to launder his drug money through FHA projects, such as building residential complexes, allowing him to clean millions and enjoy tax benefits during construction. Barnes fantasized about investing in a shopping mall in Harlem and a national network of automated car washes to transition from a drug dealer to a respectable businessman. Barnes also dealt with large amounts of cash by storing it in the local church's endowment fund, paying the church 2% for this service. This arrangement helped him avoid scrutiny when posting bail, though it wasn't foolproof. In May 1974, when Barnes was arrested on suspicion of murder, the church's rector posted his $100,000 bail, but the Bronx district attorney questioned the source of the funds. With only $330 in the church account, bail was denied. After 2 months, Barnes's attorney managed to secure his release by providing the necessary funds. Barnes's associate, Guy Fisher, aimed to become a legitimate businessman, dreaming of buying the Apollo Theater, a historic African-American music venue. However, the council faced challenges, including the loss of their heroin supplier, Matthew Madonna. They resorted to buying lower-quality heroin from a Mexican dealer, which affected their business. In 1976, Barnes and several associates were arrested due to a DEA operation involving Joseph Hayden, who unwittingly revealed many secrets to an undercover agent. Barnes was released on bail, but faced significant legal and media attention, including a cover story in the New York Times Magazine. The attention caught the eye of President Jimmy Carter, who ordered the U.S. Attorney General to ensure Barnes's conviction. Barnes was eventually sentenced to life without parole, with the trial featuring the first anonymous jury in U.S. history for their protection. From prison, Barnes learned that Fisher and other council members mismanaged the organization, leading to its decline. Fisher even pursued a relationship with Barnes's mistress, violating council rules. Disillusioned, Barnes cooperated with authorities, testifying against his former associates and detailing their crimes. This led to the arrest and conviction of many council members. In August 1998, Barnes, aged 64, was released from prison, thanks to efforts by U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani. Barnes entered the Witness Protection Program and passed away from cancer in 2012. His death was not publicized until 2019. Barnes's life, marked by his transition from Mr. Untouchable to a government informant, reflects the complex and turbulent history of Harlem in the 1970s.